Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee McKenna. I'm a therapist and healer in San Francisco. And today I want to talk about a culture of fear that we're living in right now. I feel like anxiety is more contagious than the coronavirus that everybody's worried about. Not that we shouldn't do things to be sensible and to not spread disease, but it's the second time I've been to a store and seen someone walk out with the entire stack of toilet paper. I don't know why people think that they need to wipe their butt more. I don't know what the obsession is with toilet paper. Maybe it's the squirrel mentality of wanting to store nuts up for the winter. Anyway, it's an interesting phenomenon to notice. Here in San Francisco, there have been a couple of confirmed cases. Certainly, this is a disease that spreads very quickly. The Center for Disease Control is paying a lot of attention. The World Health Organization is. I've been looking at the numbers. It looks like the mortality rate is about 3%, which is a little bit higher than a regular flu. Most of the people that have died from coronavirus are over 60, and it gets progressively more the older people get. So if you're over 80, it's like 14%. If you're over 70, it's like 11%. If you're under 40, it goes down to 0.5%. And almost no one under the age of 30 has died from this. Even in the people that have passed away, most of them have had secondary conditions which compromise their immune system or already had weakened their body. So from the perspective that I can see, this is actually a regular flu. It just spreads really quickly, and, we need to be mindful and careful, which is fine. But I have to say, I've woken up with anxiety almost every day this week. And I've been worried about money. I've been worried about my business. I've been worried about my son. None of those things are completely unusual, but the level of angst that I've felt isn't something I've felt in a while. In my meditation, in my kind of self-searching personal work that I tend to do every day in my spiritual practice, I realized that what's happening is that I'm actually feeling the culture of fear that's pervading the news and the media and the conversation. Everywhere I go, people are talking about this. They're talking about it at the gym. They're talking about it down at Walgreens. They're talking about it in the supermarket. The rice shelf is empty. The pasta shelf is empty. We're preparing for Armageddon. Preparing is fine. Again, there's nothing wrong with being prepared. What is the attitude with which we're preparing? How is that attitude affecting the rest of our life? How does our attitude affect our experience? How does the cultural experience affect our experience? One of the things that I've learned in my practice of spiritual psychology is there's a lot happening below the level of consciousness and below the level of material reality that we aren't aware of that affects us all the time. In fact, what's happening on an unconscious level or what's happening in the non-material world actually can be a greater driver than what's happening in ordinary reality. This idea of a culture of fear, looking at my own anxiety and my clients and some of my friends who are also feeling more anxious than usual this week, it has become very clear to me that what's happening is the phenomenon that I call energy matching. Energy matching is a really natural kind of tribal thing that humans do. We do it interpersonally and we do it in groups where we'll tend to match the emotional state or the energetic state of those around us. I think, water's always seeking its own level. We're always looking for balance. And so if you notice, if you hang around with people that are kind of happy and upbeat, they'll tend to raise your own vibration and your own kind of attitude can be more happy and upbeat. And if you're with people who are depressed or in a victim state or people that are enraged all the time, it's just a natural thing where we'll tend to resonate with the people that we're spending time with. That's pretty clear. And there's a lot of very interesting work to do around that interpersonally, of being able to hold your own resonance, of being able to hold the attitude and the emotional and spiritual and energetic state that you want to hold, even in the face of someone else that's resonating in a different place. As a matter of fact, I think that's our work, actually, is to bring our authentic self out, to hold our own resonance, and to call other people to resonate with us, especially if we're resonating at our best level, bringing our best self into the world. But there is a phenomenon, of course. Misery loves company. Fear tends to feed on fear. There are places for fear, absolutely, from a survival standpoint, but most of the time, anxiety just tends to be a depleting, soul-sucking force that takes our energy away from constructive, productive behavior and just puts us in a place of being debilitated, of being depleted, of being anxious all the time and living in fear. Fear is generally about the future. It's rarely about what's happening right now. The work is to really stay present in present time and to be completely engaged with what's happening and what wants to happen in this moment right now. Again, that doesn't mean we never prepare for the future. We need to make choices all the time. But if I'm always in the future, then I'm actually missing the reality that's happening right now, which is that actually everything's okay. Only a couple people in San Francisco are sick. It's unlikely that most of them will die. It's unlikely most of us will get coronavirus. And even if we do, 97% of us will survive it, just like the regular flu, where 98% of us would survive it. Realizing that I'm actually absorbing this larger cultural energy, that there's a phenomenon happening kind of in the transpersonal realm, in the ether, that I can actually feel other people's anxiety. What do I do about that? Well, first, to recognize that that's happening, that if you've had more angst than usual, that you're not alone. It may not even be yours, that there's just this energy matching that we kind of naturally do as a species in our kind of tribal nature that's happening unconsciously. So the first thing is to realize there's that's something normal about that. And then once we get conscious about stuff, this is the great thing about spiritual psychology or any personal growth work, is that once we can bring our consciousness to it, then we can actually do things about it. So recognizing that I'm kind of resonating with this energy of fear that's pervading the ether. There's all kinds of cell phone waves, and there's all kinds of radio waves, and there's all kinds of things happening in the unseen in the space around us. And the same, absolutely, in my experience, is happening on an emotional level, it's happening on an energetic level, and on a social level, that we're all like little radio broadcasters of energy, just like a cell phone tower. And what are we putting out, and what are we taking in? To become aware that that's a possibility, that that's happening, and where do we ground ourselves? It's absolutely imperative to ground ourselves in our own practice, in our own reality, in our own highest self, grounding in the earth, grounding in God, grounding in this present moment where everything's actually okay. Recognizing that there's this existential angst that's happening, and that we don't need to be a next conductor of that we can resonate in our own truth of what feels true for us. We can be concerned, we can take constructive action, but we don't need to be debilitated or run by fear. And again, fear feeds on fear. So one of the things to think about is, what are you consuming? Are you spending all of your time on the media consuming more fear-breeding information? A lot of times our mind wants to manage our emotions, so we think that if we take in information, it's going to make us feel better. Having information can be helpful, but generally our emotional and spiritual states are separate from our intellectual and mental states. They work together to create this amazing whole that we call a human being that's capable of all kinds of wonderful and powerful things. However, we have different systems that have different functions. And so if we have emotional and spiritual and existential fear, intellectual information generally does not help that. In fact, intellectual and mental information is its own system, and we want to pay attention to what we're feeding ourselves, what we're taking in. Am I taking in more fear-based information? Am I hoping that if I take in more information, it will actually make me feel better emotionally or spiritually? To be clear about what the actual problem is, if I'm trying to settle my angst, my belief is that a lot of the angst here is really about the fact of our own mortality. People don't want to die. We all have our human drive to survive, which is totally healthy. But we do have to face the fact that we are mortal. And this brings us often to deep spiritual questions. It brings us to deep emotional questions and calls us to greater maturity. And finding ways to just avoid it is not the best way to deal with it. So if you're taking in a lot of media and it's making you more anxious, I would encourage you to think about taking in more spiritual information, more grounding, balancing emotional information. My recommendations would be to listen to Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. There are some really beautiful spiritual teachers on YouTube. Adya Shanti has been really circling around me. There's a man named Rupert Spira. We actually went to hear him in Berkeley last week. Lots of wonderful spiritual teachers to ground us in ultimate reality and the ultimate truth, as opposed to the day by day just being in the numbers that are scary. So what am I feeding myself and what am I resonating with? Really important questions. So we have this angst. I know I've absorbed it. I'm a super sensitive person. I'm incredibly careful what I take in and really try to make it a choice of how much information I take in and balancing that out with positive, grounding, nourishing, spiritual, and emotionally settling information. And so really being mindful about the quality of information I'm taking in, being mindful about the conversations that I'm having, and also certainly I need to tell my own emotional truth. I need to be clear about what's actually happening in me and what am I resonating with? And can I be conscious about resonating with what's actually true for me and be in the present moment rather than just kind of picking up this existential angst? If we have it, and I know I've picked it up this week because I'm a sponge, what do we do with it? So the first thing is to really just become grounded in this moment. Come into my body is healthy. Look at where I actually am. I'm in my room. Everything is good. My kids are good. My friends are good. Everything's okay right now. Spending time in nature. Just being out watching the birds. It's spring here in San Francisco because we get spring marvelously early. So watching the buds bloom, remembering that there's a life force that's always there. The sun is setting, the sun is rising, there are things to depend on. I'm part of this system, just to really ground myself in the spiritual reality, to ground myself in nature, to ground myself in what's actually true in my life right now. It's actually a wonderful moment right now. For me, this is where prayer can be very, very helpful in whatever way you pray, whether you're praying just to get in connection with your own highest self, whether you pray to God, whether you pray to the great spirit of the universe, or whatever you find as source. My favorite prayer in relation to fear is, please remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. And this points to a spiritual practice called transmutation. And that is taking one kind of energy and redirecting it into another kind of direction. Redirecting it in another more constructive area. So I'm taking the energy of fear, which is debilitating and depleting, and freezing, and I'm directing that energy into positive, constructive action, which is certainly probably what drives people to hoard toilet paper right now, is they're taking their angst and they're putting it in positive, constructive action. Being mindful about that idea, where can I put my fear energy that's positive and constructive? Is there anything I'm avoiding in my life? Is there anything that I need to do or that I could do that would actually be nourishing and fulfilling to me? Last night, I spent some time doing artwork. There's a couple of pieces of art that I really like to work big. And one of my friends found some really big core board. And so we found a projector and we projected some artwork into these. It was really fun. Anyway, I made started some really big pieces of artwork. Creating things is really helpful for me. What can I generate that's positive and constructive in the world? Where can I be helpful? Where can I be of service to someone else? What can I do to get outside of my own little fear bubble and bring positive, constructive action into the world? Please remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Where are we being called to grow when we face fears or fears like this arise? That's an excellent question. It's always a great question for me. I know I'm working with some of my money issues and I can feel really frozen around that. And fear just wants to keep me frozen. Please remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. I often need to actually face the thing that I'm most afraid of. My favorite quote, I say it all the time. Will Smith says, God put all the best things on the other side of fear. Are there any risks I need to take that would be helpful and constructive? Where can I put this energy that's going to move me forward in my own evolution? Where can I put this energy of fear and direct that energy, that's a lot of energy, and kind of turn the wheel so that it's facing in the opposite direction, that energy can actually be used as fuel to serve me and to serve other people. So how do we take this existential angst and transmute it, transform it into something that's constructive and helpful for other people? Everything that happens in the world, all life energy, has value and can be constructive if we're mindful and conscious of it and use it for the benefit of ourselves and others. If that's our intention, then we're absolutely participating optimally in our own life. So the question for me is, how can I turn this culture of fear, this existential angst, into positive, constructive action? How can I turn my own angst into compassionate, constructive service for myself and for others? And I challenge you to ask those questions for yourself. And I hope that my fear prayer is helpful for you. This is Renee LaValle McKenna with Spiritual Psychology. If you want to book a session with me, I see people in person and remotely. You can shoot me an email at info@reneemckenna.com. You can find my new book, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, on Amazon or on my website at reneemckenna.com. Blessings on your path. Until we meet again, stay well.